What's going on, everyone? Welcome into the 22nd episode of Jack's Mailbag, the series where I answer your Gamecock athletics questions. If you have a question you want answered on next week's episode, be sure to drop it in the comments section below on this YouTube video, or I'll post on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com, where you can ask any and all of your questions. And without further ado, let's get into our first question of the week from Sky Baby, who asks, what's the story behind the loss of the baseball recruit? So this question is in reference to Peter Mershon, who had been committed to South Carolina in the class of 2025 for what feels like, well, it's almost about a year now, I believe. I don't know the specific date, but I did go back on my old stories and stuff because I remember interviewing him, and I wrote a commitment story on him last October in 2023. So it's been almost a year, if not about a year. And yeah, it's kind of it's not surprising, but the fact that it's coming like this close to when fall practice is about a month and a half away now, the fact that it's happening, it's not surprising, but at the same time, it's like it's a little at the same time. But I understand why. Probably we obviously don't know the specifics behind it at the moment, but I think it has to do with the fact of South Carolina. It's well noted that South Carolina has to cut down its roster to 40 by the time they play fall scrimmages against Air Force in Charleston this fall, and they have about 48 guys, 51 guys on the roster right now. 48 when it's all said and done, because 3 guys are going to for sure redshirt and miss the season with Tommy John surgery from the high school ranks with pitchers. So you narrow it down to 48. You got to cut down 8 more guys. I don't know what went into it, but I'm assuming because Mershon, you also have to keep in mind he's a catcher. So because they have Noah Franklin also coming in at some point in the future, and then you have guys like Ryan Bakes and Max Coffer, and just so much competition at that spot. I think what probably happened is one of two things. The coaches probably had a conversation with him and just figured that they came to a conclusion that you're probably not going to play here right now. I don't think that was it. I just think it was more so like Mershon kind of looked at the whole picture a little bit and just decided maybe there's a better opportunity elsewhere with the chance to play right away. I'm sure that's kind of what it comes down to. I feel like that's kind of the case in any sport with guys who decide to decommit and reopen their recruiting process. Now, it's not to say he won't ever suit up as a Gamecock, right? I mean, just because he reopened his recruiting, it's not likely, but there is always the off chance he could decide maybe come back to South Carolina. But I doubt it. And, his brother David played at Mississippi State, so that could always be an option. Wouldn't surprise me if he somehow stayed inside the SEC, but he's a good player, seems to really have a lot of good tools. I remember he had a lot of high energy when I was talking to him last year. And, yeah, it's definitely a loss, but you just wish him well and hope for the best. Next question comes from Joel FT 2001, who asks, who will be the number 1 wide receiver this year? One name. Well, you got a lot of options at receiver this year. I think this is kind of a 2 different part answer. So you can answer this one of 2 ways. You can answer it like, okay, who's going to be number 1 wide receiver on the depth chart this year for South Carolina, or who's going to be the number 1 wide receiver in terms of playmaking and stuff by the end of the year. So I'll answer it kind of in 2 separate parts, just because I didn't know how the question was specifically phrased. So number 1 on the depth chart, probably for week 1, I don't know. You got some guys. For me, I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't really know if there's going to be a true number 1 guy in this room. I feel like you could look at maybe a few options here. Nick Harbor could always be your number 1 guy. I doubt it, though. He feels more like a 2 or 3 right now, but I think he can develop into a 1. You also have transfers like Dale Von Campbell, who has a ton of experience. I got a story coming out on him this weekend, so be sure to check that out when it drops. It's going to be dropping on Saturday. And then, you have him. He's a big-time guy who, surprisingly, here's an interesting stat that I figured out today. Xavier Legette last year averaged about 17.7 yards per catch. Dale Von Campbell, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, he averaged about 19 yards a catch, which is really insane. It was top 15 in college football last year at Nevada. So getting a guy like that who obviously came to South Carolina later than most, transferred over here right near the end of April, and he's a guy that I expect to be a big playmaker, and I could see him being the number one guy. I'm not sure though. And then you also have Vendravius Jacobs, who transferred from Florida State, good player there. I could definitely see him being that top guy. If I had to guess right now, though, it's just I don't know who the top target's going to be. That's the thing. But I'll answer it the other way too. Sorry, that wasn't a great answer right there. But I think by the end of the year, I'm really buying into the hype right now. I really like what Dale Von Campbell can do. Like I said before, big time deep threat. I think he's a guy that he's very similar in height to Nick Harbor. The way he talked this week at offensive availability on Tuesday, he just sounds like a guy. He's in his 6th year. He's been at Illinois and Nevada, and he really kind of not fully, but he started bursting onto the scene, especially last year with the Wolfpack. And I think this year you could see him be a guy that's, assuming he stays healthy, will get a ton of targets, ton of catches. And I think he's a guy that, with Nick Harbor, we're not sure what he looks like yet in the deep ball game. I think with his size and speed, it can definitely work. But I think Campbell's more of a lock to, like, if you're betting on him to, make big plays and catches, I think that's the guy to go with. And for me, I feel good about where he's at right now, and I definitely think he's a guy that we need to be paying attention to once the season gets going. And our final question comes from Chanticleer 37. I guess we're getting some Coastal Carolina people on here. I don't know on the Insiders Forum, but I like the name. Any Mo Kaba updates? Yeah. So Kaba spoke on Wednesday with defensive players. And, when we were at Media Day last Thursday, every South Carolina player was supposed to speak and all that. And at least when I was talking to other media members there, no one really remembered seeing Kaba there. So I think Wednesday was the first real opportunity to hear from Mo after the whole injury thing. I think this is probably the first time we've heard from him since probably last season when he was preparing to come back from his second ACL injury. And now, obviously, in that first game against UNC last year, tears his ACL again, and he's out for the season for a second straight year in a row. And with him, it's like, what's the deal with him? Is he going to be ready for next season? Is he even going to want to play? And when he spoke to us, quitting, he said, was never an option for him. Stopping was never an option. He's always wanted to get back out there and play again. And so coming into camp, he's been out there. He's been healthy, apparently, and we'll see how he looks. There's going to be a scrimmage this weekend at Williams-Brice Stadium for South Carolina. It'll be the first fall scrimmage of the preseason. And with Kaba, he feels 100% right now. But at the same time, it's like he hasn't played a game since UNC last year, which is all the way back in September. And at the same time, while his body might be feeling great, it's the mental state of, okay, got to make sure you're taking care of your knee, not overdoing it. You don't want to go full go every single rep right away in the early weeks of fall camp. I mean, you want to make sure, especially coming off a big injury, you're keeping that knee as healthy and fresh as possible and preventing injuries. I think that's kind of how the whole thing started to begin with last year, because he did say, going into camp last year when he was back healthy, he didn't know how to really give himself a break and a rest. And that's something the coaches have tried harping on more this fall camp is, hey, like you've gone 3 reps in a row. Why don't you take a breather and all that? So that way, you're staying fresh. And I think that's the big thing. But coming into Saturday's scrimmage at Williams-Brice Stadium, he definitely wants to get back out there, just make some plays, have that feeling of being hit again, and hopefully everything holds up. And that's kind of the keys for him. So you definitely hope that for his sake, and I think everyone's probably going to be rooting for this guy, right? I think you want to make sure that he's good to go for the season opener, and then from there he can stay healthy, because you got to go all the way back to 2022. The last time he had been healthy was those first few weeks of the season, and then he gets hurt against Arkansas. But coming into that season, I think people forget he was named the most improved defensive player of the spring that year. And even the season before that, he was a fine player on defense for South Carolina. So I think having him back, if he's any bit as good as he was prior to the injuries, that only adds to what this defense can do this year. And I feel like we're not probably talking about him enough just because we haven't seen him in so long, and God knows how he looks after another ACL injury. Those can impact you, but I definitely feel like if he does stay healthy, he really can be a regular, impactful type of player for South Carolina. But obviously, you got to stay healthy to do that. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of Jack's Mailbag. Again, if you have a question you want answered on next week's episode, be sure to drop it in the comments section below on this YouTube video. Or, like I said before, I'll post on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com. Be sure to stay locked into Gamecock Central for all football coverage and basketball, baseball, the whole ordeal. Got a lot of good stuff coming out as the football season comes around, and we're looking forward to it. So that's going to do it for this week's episode, and have a good one, guys.